Well, Wes, it's good to see you as always. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Rob. It's good to be here.
Before we take off on our next topic, which I think is going to be pretty fascinating to talk about, something that everyone deals with, I wondered what you might think about soliciting questions from our listeners on what they'd like to hear us talk about.
I think that's a great idea. I'd like this to be responsive. If we have pastors or lay leaders or really just anybody that has a topic that would be helpful for us to discuss, I think it's a fantastic idea.
Well, great. So if you're listening out there, you can send your suggestions to pastorpastor@thenetcenter.org. That's pastorpastor@thenetcenter.org. We would love to see your suggestions, and we'll let you know what we hear and where we go from there. But we're on to our topic of the day, and that is anger. Wes, have you ever been angry?
Yeah, in fact, I grew up in a very angry home, sort of even at times bordering on violent. So, yes, it was very much a part of my upbringing.
Yeah, I have never been angry, so I'm very interested.
This will be very educational for you, is how the other side actually lives.
Yeah, I don't really even understand it. So, but maybe you can help me understand it. So maybe we start with that. Help me understand anger. What is anger?
Well, that's a good question. I think at its root, it's an emotion. And I think it's an emotion that we're hardwired to express, like sadness, joy. What makes people cry? There's a hard wire in there that causes that. And I think it's a strong emotional reaction in general to some sort of a perceived injustice or a real injustice. But somewhere in there, things have not gone the way that we were expecting or that we thought we were entitled to see them go. And this emotional reaction, strong opposition and protest, is, I think, what we call anger.
So your description right there, very helpful. But let me press on this point. Does anger always look the same for everybody? Because you're talking about, a strong emotion. Is it always outward?
No. Anger has many faces, many masks. The hardest person to read is the one who doesn't respond in the what we might call the stereotypical angry way. They're responding maybe in a very withdrawn kind of a way, the silent killers, you might say. So no, I think it's very much filtered through your personality. And introverts are going to respond differently from extroverts. People that are very demonstrative are going to respond very differently from people that are very subdued. You've got the whole gamut, but anger's still very much in those people's lives.
So you say everybody experiences anger.
Everybody experiences anger. Everybody struggles with anger at a sinful level. There's nobody who doesn't struggle with being sinfully angry, but everybody struggles first and foremost just with the emotion of anger.
How do I know I'm angry?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rob. I think that there's probably a number of somatic manifestations of that. Maybe parts of your body tighten up. Maybe you clench the jaw. Emotionally, you're stirred. There's a churning that you feel. There's usually a strong spirit of protest. You want to say something. You want to shoot back a text, a flamer. You want to do something to address the situation. You want to do something to be heard, to be understood. So there's a strong agitation feeling that is seeking resolution. And I think it can create all kinds of bodily effects, are both internal and even, I know I've punched a wall before. There's just kind of a reaction to getting angry. And for a different personality, it could just be a shutdown. They're just shut down. They're not responding. They're out of here. And emotionally, you can't connect with them. There's a kind of a simmering that's going on there. And so different people have different responses, but they're strong responses.
It seems that people want to deny being angry. You say, why are you so angry? I'm not angry.
Yes.
What is that?
You're spot on with that reality. Nobody wants to admit that they're angry. I can't tell you the countless counseling situations that I've been in or that Sue and I have been in that it's so obvious that the counselee is angry. And if you go directly to that, they'll deny it 9 out of 10 times. I think it's because we've designated all anger as sin. So everybody has the default setting that if they're angry, it's wrong. Christians included. You shouldn't get angry. That's kind of the 11th commandment. Thou shalt not be angry. And so if you ask them if they're angry, they're going to confess, yes, I'm in sin. I think it's a combination of feeling ashamed because they're angry and not having any nuances to their anger. It's either right or wrong, and in most people's case, it's just wrong. They can't see that maybe anger could be neutral.
Talk about that. Anger being neutral. Is it be angry yet do not sin?
Yeah.
Flesh that out for me.
I think it has to do with understanding our emotions, Rob. We're emotional beings. We are made in the image of God. God is an emotional being. We see it in Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was an emotional being. Him being the Son of God doesn't mean that he has no ability to identify with us in the full orb. He's fully man. He's fully God. He was emotional. He got angry. He was sad. He wept at Lazarus' funeral in John chapter 11. He was grieved by things. He was fatigued. How do you sleep in a boat in a Galilean storm on the Sea of Galilee and the waves are over you? Yes, he was at peace, but he was also exhausted. So he was subject to the full gamut of emotions. And so we've got to start by looking at him and realizing it's possible to be angry. When Jesus whipped the money changers out of the temple, you can't possibly interpret that and think, he was just la, 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 la. He's overturning their tables. He's whipping them. I think we've got to start by realizing it's possible to be angry and yet not sin. So it has to be an emotion that can be expressed. God is a God of wrath. He's a God of anger. He obviously is not sinning. And so I think we've got to step back and maybe overturn some of our presuppositions that all anger is sin or that anger is always sin, and just recognize, no, we're hardwired like with sadness. Is all sadness sin? No, but what happens if you go into some kind of a funk where you don't care about anybody around you, you're just, sort of mired in your own misery? I think at one point we would say, this isn't really helpful. You've now turned this into something that's very self-centered, and let's help get you out of this, because this isn't a place where you want to be. And likewise, not all anger is sin. So it's that initial reaction that we have to a real or perceived injustice. And now the question is, what are we going to do with that reaction? And time is of the essence. Rob, do you know what I mean when I say time is of the essence?
Yeah, I'm guessing you're saying, don't let it fester, like work it. Like, that's why I'd ask the question, how do you know you're angry? Okay, now I know I'm angry. What am I supposed to do about it, Wes?
Yes, and Ephesians 4, be angry, yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. I think of anger like a river. Rivers are very pastoral, bubbling brooks going down through the valley, but any kind of significant rainfall can turn that gentle flowing stream into a raging torrent. And when it overflows its banks, now it's wreaking havoc. It's wreaking destruction. So what happens is if anger isn't addressed quickly, it's like a river that is rising and overflowing its banks. And it happens very fast. That's why we have the admonition, do not let the sun go down on your anger. Time is of the essence. And so it starts as a neutral emotion, I think most of the time. And now we have to address that to keep it from festering, to keep it from overflowing its banks and just gobs of collateral damage that comes from that.
Do you think the anger gets worse if we don't address it? If we just, we can't, maybe we'll want to address it and we can't. And you've got to put it on a shelf and deal with it later. But I guess my question is, what is fast in dealing with anger? And what if I don't deal with it fast? What happens to it?
Well, first of all, there's never a situation where you can't deal with anger. We're talking regarding believers. Even unbelievers, I think, have the capacity to do a lot to address their anger. So I don't think there's ever a scenario where you can't address it. But if you don't address it, first of all, it doesn't go away by itself. And what it usually does is it goes subterranean. So now it's buried and it starts to have all kinds of spawning that may not be readily associated with that anger. It's the invariable, you come home and you kick the dog. Well, why did you kick the dog? The dog didn't do anything. Well, probably there's something that happened at work, not related to the dog. The dog just sitting there. But now it's starting to radiate, and it's starting to, it's an infection. So think about an infection. You get a splinter. If you don't deal with that splinter right away, then it gets infected. And then if you let it go long enough, it can radiate throughout the whole hand, maybe up the arm. You have to deal with it quickly, or it's going to do that. And it's going to probably spill over into all sorts of relationships. And if you let it go long enough, I believe it actually spills into depression. If anger is not addressed ultimately, you will find you can't stay energized indefinitely with that anger. So now you're just discouraged, and you can fall into real depression from unresolved anger.
We mentioned people deny that they're angry. I'm not angry. Why are you saying I'm angry? And we say that out loud. Do you think we also say that to ourselves? Because when you walk in the door and you kick the dog, you didn't probably even know you were angry. So how do you diagnose yourself to know, I'm angry, I've got to deal with this? Because usually it doesn't come out until something brings it out. I'm frustrated. I didn't know I was so frustrated about that till I walked in the house and I kicked the dog.
Yeah, I think there are those delays, but I tend to think step one in my mind is giving yourself permission to be angry. In other words, not reproaching yourself because you responded or that you feel anger, which in my mind comes from seeing that anger can be a neutral thing. It's just something you're hardwired to do. There's legitimate things to be angry about. There are legitimate things to be angry about. In fact, I think righteousness demands that you're angry about certain things. To not get angry at certain things would be unrighteous. If you see somebody mistreat somebody in a terrible and dramatic way, if you don't feel anger at that, something's wrong with your moral compass. So I think it's the process of recognizing anger is part of how God's made me, and therefore I'm not going to be in this suppression mode to deny it at all costs. That opens it up for me to face easier and quicker than I'm angry. Because I think people kind of know they're angry, but let's say it's something they perceive that's petty. Now, who wants to admit they're angry about something that's petty? They don't want to admit that. So if you say you're angry, well, it's like, well, if I was a mature person, I wouldn't be angry at that. So no, I guess I'm not angry. No. You've just gone prescriptive. I just want you to describe how you're feeling. Yeah, actually, when that person pulled in that parking spot, which they didn't even see me, that I was wanting to go into that spot, I got pretty angry about it. Nobody really did anything wrong. Aren't I silly? You don't want to admit that. It feels petty. So I think there's a lot of reasons. You don't want to admit it's sin. You don't want to be petty. You don't want to be immature. So it's just easier to deny that you're angry, even though you can hardly say the words without revealing that you're angry.
It's a little bit like the 12-step process where maybe the first thing you do to start the healing is to admit you've got a problem.
Hello, my name is Wes Pastor, and I'm an angry person. Yeah, bingo. Now we're going to get somewhere.
Yeah, and also I think what you said is very helpful, that it can be neutral. So you can try to think about, why am I angry? And I don't need to feel bad about even exploring that with myself, because I think a lot of us walk around going, I'm never supposed to be angry. And if I'm a Christian, now I'm feeling guilty about it. And now I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why am I angry? We don't do that when we're like, why am I sad?
No.
Like, everyone, get around me.
Yeah.
It's like, don't you feel bad for me? Like, you'll go to your spouse, I'm really sad. Oh, honey, what's wrong? We talk about it. You know, hey, I'm really angry. You're angry? I'm sorry you're angry. It's like, what are you angry about? You know, it's just a different thing.
It's a different thing.
So it's a little bit of an orientation.
It is. It's a different orientation, and we need to let anger just be in the same pool with joy, sadness, not have it be in its own special category. I think because it's easy to hurt somebody when you're angry. The other ones don't have a hurt component to it. This one can. If it's not controlled, yeah, it can be. I mean, Jesus said if you're angry at your brother, you're guilty of the fires of hell. It's a violation of the sixth commandment, thou shalt not murder. So I think we're really nervous about that.
Yeah, rightfully so.
Rightfully so.
Can you give some more examples of righteous anger? Now, you gave an example. It was a good example, but it was a pretty dramatic example.
Yeah.
But can you give some examples of things that we all deal with on a daily or maybe just a normal basis?
Yeah. I mean, someone makes a bit of a cutting remark. Maybe they think they're joking, but it cuts a little deep. Or somebody says something to you that you think is an unfair characterization. And again, maybe they think they're joking, but to you, it's a misunderstanding. Or you're just driving in traffic. You know, there's 3 miles of no traffic behind you, but the guy has to turn left in front of you that causes you to have to put on your brakes. You know, he couldn't wait a nanosecond for you to pass by. I don't know. I get angry at that. It feels very selfish, very thoughtless. All he was caring about, he's got to go first.
So it's okay that I'm getting angry about that.
It's okay that you're getting angry about that.
This is a great episode.
I get angry. We've got a problem in Vermont where we're in love with traffic lights. And we like to put traffic lights like every 600 feet. And they're not coordinated. I already struggle being an impatient man, but I'm like, maybe I could sit down with the traffic designers and we could talk about these things. Maybe we could do some roundabouts. I mean, surely there's a better system. And if I'm not careful, I can get kind of irritated about it. Or if somebody's, the speed limit's 40 and they're going 25. I can get angry about that. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a righteous anger, but it doesn't have to be automatically sinful. If I recognize I'm responding that way quickly, I can say, okay, they're not sinning by only going 25 miles per hour. It's kind of neutral.
You don't beat yourself up.
You don't have to beat yourself up over it. It's an unmet expectation. I think a lot of neutral angers are unmet expectations, and those expectations aren't sinful. Things didn't just go the way that I was hoping they would go, and I react to that in an angry way. Other people might be just more sad about it. But some people, they go to anger pretty fast. So those are just a lot of things that don't necessarily have to be confessed as sin.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to the traffic ones.
Yes.
I know I can, because I left my house, I'm driving to, say, the grocery store, and I expect it to go perfectly and everyone to stay out of my way. Everyone's supposed to use their blinker.
Yeah.
No, and then when they don't, I get annoyed.
I think in the whole family dynamic, there's all kinds of possibilities for being angry. The mom doesn't feel appreciated. The husband comes home and doesn't really greet his wife, just like, where's dinner? She doesn't feel appreciated. Or, he's 15 minutes late, and okay, maybe he should have called, hard to know, but she starts on him as soon as he comes through the door. He's been working all day. He's tired. It's been a hard day. And immediately he's like, I don't feel like I should be treated that way. And there's probably truth to that. We're not giving one another grace in those situations. We kind of have an expectation that we'll be gracious to one another and give people a little maneuvering room. And you get angry about that. I don't think that's necessarily sinful anger.
So as a pastor, when you're counseling people, and you mentioned, you're counseling a lot of people about anger. We all deal with it, and it can have some really nasty, results. Dealing with somebody that has been angry for a little while versus dealing with somebody that's been angry for maybe even years. help me understand, like, it's just got to be a lot more work. You're backing way up. There's just been some collateral damage. Why is it so critical? We talked about this for a second, but I want to understand this a little bit better. Why is it so critical to address our anger quickly? Now, you talked about not going to bed. Don't let the sun set on your anger. But less literally than that. I'm frustrated. I'm angry. Why do I need to deal with that? What's going to happen if I don't deal with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rob. There's a lot of ways to go at it, but let me go at it this way. Usually when you're angry at another person, you have judged what they've done, and it's been found wanting. They've not responded or acted the way that you thought they should have acted, and most of the time it affects you directly. Not necessarily. It could affect your kids, your spouse, your church, but a lot of times it's affecting you, and you've judged them. Now, let's suggest that one of the big causes for these kinds of scenarios is just a misunderstanding. Actually, you misunderstood what they said or what they did, or you ascribed a motive to them that's just not true. But if you don't act on that, resolve that, now you have created a stereotype of that person, which, if it was really a misunderstanding, is actually a sinful judgment toward that person. And every transaction that goes forward from that moment is going to be filtered through that jaded lens, the lens that really got formed when you got angry at what you perceived was an inappropriate response. So now I'm going through life judging that person, calling that person in my mind that kind of a person. Yeah, that's how they are. And I'm not interpreting subsequent behaviors fairly, equitably, accurately. So I think it can just jade. It can really sully your relationships badly if you're not going through that process. And I see that as one of the biggest problems in the church. Someone gets tweaked. They don't check out their perceptions. They get angry and they solidify. They galvanize on that perception. And there's never a chance for that person to say, oh, that's not what I meant. I am so sorry that that's what you thought I said. What I meant, and it may be just the opposite, but it just got taken the wrong way. And now we've got strained relationships, alienation within the family, within the body of Christ, all because we didn't deal with our anger quickly. And to try to go back 3 months later, and I'm dealing with those kind of situations all the time, and I have to end up saying, look, you blew it. You had a chance to actually work this out and try to get to the truth. By now, it's just a faint memory. We can't recreate that.
It gets fuzzy.
It gets fuzzy, and everybody, of course, is prejudiced toward their own perceptions.
Of course.
I'm sure that's what I heard. And so if you don't do it quickly, you have to almost have an amnesty program where you just wipe the slate clean and start over. And nobody wants to do that because, like, wait a minute, well, this still wasn't dealt with. Yeah, but it's too late now because nobody can really accurately deal with this.
As long as I've known you, Wes, and I think it's almost 25 years now, believe it or not, I've heard you say so many times, if you've got a nag, you need to deal with it. And is this why?
Yes, that's right. The nag won't go away. It'll fester. It'll corrupt the relationship. Then the body of Christ is compromised. Our witness for the gospel is compromised because we're kind of not liking people in the church, or even worse, in our families. We're not liking them. And so I think it's a creed to live by. If we have been reconciled to God by the blood of his Son, how can we not be reconciled to one another? And the Bible's given us all the information we need as to how to go about doing that. And one of them is get after it. Don't sit around twiddling your thumbs. You got a nag. It's of utmost importance to address that quickly.
What about the idea of, I know the answer to this because you've demonstrated it to me. You've come to me over the last 25 years of time and said, Rob, I'm wondering if you've got a nag with me. Now, people never get angry with pastors. We know that. We don't need to talk about that. We do need to talk about that. What about coming to somebody else and saying, do you have a nag with me? Is that helpful, or is it a good idea? Or
Yes.
are you maybe poking at something you shouldn't be poking at?
No, I mean, again, you're right on a biblical path. If you're making your offering and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there, go your way, first be reconciled to your brother, then come and make your offering. So either way, if I'm upset at somebody or if I think somebody's upset at me, again, how you do that is another matter, and you can do that badly. But if the motive is, I want to be right, so it's like, are you upset at me? I mean, a good husband is going to ask his wife, honey, is everything okay? Because husbands do things and they're kind of not aware they did them. And so, I just ask, is things that seem a little off here, is there anything that I did? Sometimes she will say, you don't remember what you said before you left this morning? And half the time, my answer is, no, I really don't, but I'm all ears. And she'll say, well, that kind of hurt my feelings when you said that. And most of the time that results in an apology. So yeah, we're testing the water. We're always wanting to make sure. I mean, you don't want somebody that's like every 5 minutes driving you crazy about something like that. Let's move on. But if you see kind of patterned withdrawal or, patterned terseness in their responses to you, it's like, are we okay? Is everything all right? I'm just wondering. So I think that's right out of Matthew 5. That's right out of the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, and when it's with your spouse, you're with them a lot, obviously. So maybe it's a little bit easier to kind of diagnose it. You've got the time to deal with it. But when it's somebody that you don't see very often,
that's right.
You've really got to have your antennas up.
You do.
Because you're just seeing them at church, or you just see them at your community group perhaps, or something along those lines.
That's right.
You got to, like you said, you got to go after it.
You got to go after it. And, I can think of 2 situations right off the top of my head, Rob, where parishioners came to me. I had not observed it. Parishioners came to me, 2 different people, both said to me at 2 different times, they'd been angry at me for 5 years. 5 years. And, I'm like...
It's a long nag.
Really? But I appreciated that they came to me.
That it wasn't
and they
6.
said that. Yeah. I mean, they could have just let it keep going. And maybe they were not clear that they were feeling that way. They came, we cleared that up, and the relationship was good. In one case, it's continued to be very, very good. People still around. People move, so you don't continue to relate to everybody. But I think those things can really harm relationships, and best to just do it quickly. And while everybody knows what happened, and there's a chance maybe to reconstruct it a little bit, find out, is it a misunderstanding? Is it just we have differences that are okay to have? Or was there really sin involved? If you do it quickly, you can get to the bottom of it. There's a good chance of getting to the bottom of it.
What do people get angry with pastors about?
My goodness. I mean, pastors are very exposed. When you get up and you give a sermon for 45 minutes every week, when you lead meetings, congregational meetings, when you write letters, when you're counseling their friends, not to mention them, I mean, there's just so many points of exposure for the pastor. And, Americans are pretty opinionated. So they hear something, even if it's questionable whether or not what they heard was an accurate portrayal of what actually happened. They hear about it and they react. And there's a lot of things to disagree with, like, did we handle that situation appropriately? People have 100 opinions on a situation. They find out someone's been counseled or maybe somebody's been confronted, and they're like, well, I don't think that's right. I don't think they should have done that. Who does he think he is? Or you say something in the sermon, you stop preaching and you start meddling a little bit. You're kind of going after your congregation a little bit, and it's kind of like, I don't think he had any right to say that. Well, I don't agree with that. He says a doctrinal idea. Well, I don't agree with that. So it's just, there's 1,000 points.
Pastors are exposed.
They are exposed. And I have found that it's not a strength, at least in the American church, to come forward with your disagreements and with your nags. it's much more likely that people just kind of sit on them. And then you get an email a year later, they're leaving the church. I've gotten those emails, and when they told me the reason, I just grieved because I thought we could have talked that out in 15 minutes if I'd have known that that was what was going on. But if you don't talk it out after a year, you've interpreted all of his sermons through that lens that's kind of jaded, and you're just not happy. And finally, you just decide to leave. So it's easy not to process anger in a godly way.
That has to be one of the good reasons, among many, that you're really connecting with your people beyond just Sunday morning behind the pulpit. Because if you are talking to them and you're having just casual conversation, you sense they're avoiding you because, like you said, it's a nag, it festers, it's bugging them on Sunday morning.
Yep.
They kind of forget about it. But then the next Sunday morning comes and it's a little bit worse.
Yes, that's right.
And you've got 200-300 people in front of you at one point. Talk a little bit about that, Wes. Like what can a pastor do to really make sure that they're having this interaction so they can understand where people are at and maybe ask them the question, how are we doing?
Yeah. Well, I think you're just working at connecting with people in a variety of ways, including on Sunday morning. You're trying to have as many casual conversations as you can, and you're trying to read the room and take the temperature, but you're involved in visitation, and not just visitation that is crisis counseling. You're trying to do sort of well care. When you go in for your annual checkup, it's a well care visit, but the doctor is always looking to see if there's anything to be concerned about. When you get older, you don't even like to go in there because it's kind of like taking an old car to the mechanic. For sure, he's going to find something that needs repaired. It's like, I don't think I want to know about it, but you're doing well care visitation, if you will, and you're listening. And their attitude toward you, it's hard to hide in those situations. If there's something punky there, probably it's going to come out. And especially if you ask a question like, how are you doing with the church? Are you encouraged with what you see? Are there some things that you'd like to see different? We did annual surveys. We still do, where we're really asking people for feedback. And the elders go over those surveys very, very carefully. And we would always look. There was always surveys where you could tell people had nags. And they used the survey as a way of venting those nags. So we would just follow up in person, hey, I'd love to come and talk to you about that and have a good discussion. And then at the end say, and next time, don't wait for the survey. You've had this nag for quite a while. Give us a call. We want to hear about that. Let's resolve this quicker. And people generally appreciate that.
I think you said something really key right there. We want to know about it.
Yeah.
I think maybe some don't want to know about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just part of it's the occupational hazard, if you want. If you don't want to know about it, you should go into a different line of work because it's much better to deal with someone coming straight out and saying, I'm very unhappy, than for someone acting like they're happy when they're not happy. I would much rather someone just come straight out and tell me how they're feeling. Now you have a chance to deal with it. The other one, no chance. It's just potentially a bubbling volcano that at some point may erupt.
Weston, that's what I want to talk about on the next episode is the bubbling volcano, the not dealing with it, and maybe what a lifestyle of anger just might indicate.
Love to talk about that, Rob.
All right, so we'll look forward to that on the next time. With more to discuss on anger, it's certainly, let's just say, pertinent to everybody out there.
Oh, that's good. Thanks, Rob.
All right, thank you, Wes. To learn more about the Net Center for Church Planning and Revitalization's training and sending programs, visit us online at thenetcenter.org. For questions or comments, email us at pastorpastor@thenetcenter.org. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe and consider sharing this episode with a friend. This podcast is a production of the Net Center for Church Planning and Revitalization. Nets, for the life of the church.